All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this special presentation here at the Octavia Flynn Public Library. We are honored to have a wonderful person join us for this special event today. We are celebrating Native American Heritage Month, or Indigenous Peoples Month, here at the library. And so it's even that much more special to have our special guest with us. So I am going to introduce to you our guest speaker. His name is Chef Nephi Craig, and I'm going to turn things over to him. So thank you, Chef Craig, for doing this for us, and we can't wait to see what you have to share.
Okay, you ready?
It's all yours.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come and join us today for this session. I know there's many other things that you could probably be doing with your time, so coming to join us with the library's programming is, we're very grateful and appreciate it. The library got in touch with me after reviewing the film Gather, and if you're unfamiliar, the film Gather came out a couple months ago, and it's a film on indigenous food sovereignty across North America and the United States. It focuses on a small handful of food practitioners from the Northwest to the American Southwest and the Great Plains. And it gives you a real small glimpse into a much larger picture of food sovereignty in the United States, which also is a very important issue from South America through Mexico, all the way up into North America and into Alaska. Native American peoples or indigenous peoples are using indigenous foodways, ancestral knowledge, also known as traditional ecological knowledge, to revitalize health, reclaim identity, and make space in the larger realm of art, science, cooking, and other professional endeavors as it relates to our culture and our public health. So my name is Nephi Craig. I'm White Mountain Apache, and I'm also Navajo. I've been cooking professionally 22 years, and it's a great honor to be here to share what I love to do with you all. I'm inviting you to participate in this session, and I hope that I can share some information that will help you to maybe see food a little bit differently compared to how we normally see food. The term indigenous foods in my pathway as a native chef, when I first started cooking 22 years ago, say in 1998, when I got into a culinary school, one of the first things that I began to question and wonder about was, is there such thing as a Native American cuisine? And because I had grown up on the White Mountain Apache tribe, and I also grew up on the Navajo Nation, I had been around food and in a very intimate way. And when I decided to go to cooking school, we were being taught world history of cuisine, and we're learning about very amazing things like the Spice Wars, and we're learning about history of ingredients and the Renaissance and classical cuisine and all of these things that swirl around the world of gastronomy or professional cooking. And what I noticed as a person from the White Mountain Apache tribe and the Navajo Nation was that there was very little to no mention of indigenous peoples of the Americas. There was mention of Mexico with chocolate and chilies and maybe potatoes, but there was no mention of any tribes specific to North America and even South America. It was just, we were just categorized in a really broad and very minimal way at the same time. So being that I had grown up around food in different ways, it made me wonder, like, hey, where do we fit into this picture of world gastronomy? And that feeling of alienation, it made me kind of wonder and question, and it would stay with me my whole entire career. And when I was in culinary school, and I asked one of my chefs, asked him, hey chef, have you ever heard of a Native American cuisine? And the response was, I know you make fry bread. I know you boil a lot of stews. And to me, when I heard that message from my chef instructor, that was kind of a dismissive take on who we were as Native peoples. Yeah, it's true that a lot of tribes make fry bread. Yeah, it's true that we boil a lot of stews. but there is a vast, vast amount of information about culinary science, agricultural science, cultural information, linguistics, mathematics, and even medicine. So little did I, and back then when I was 18 years old, I didn't know how to articulate that to my culinary instructor. So I just kind of took that as a message that maybe I shouldn't really bring this up because it kind of made me feel embarrassed when we're studying the cuisines of Asia and Italy and Europe, and they got these grand documented histories that are written into this curriculum. So, but that didn't stop me. I would begin to study on my own. I went to cooking school before the Food Network was really popular, before we were all so connected through social media. And so I had to really kind of hit the libraries and do some research. And so all along the way, I would be studying native foods. And in every kitchen that I would work in, I would ask other chefs and cooks and people in professional kitchens, hey, have you ever met a native chef? Do you know any native chefs? And the response was always, I always say it's like a Bigfoot sighting. Somebody knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who saw a native chef somewhere, but they couldn't remember what tribe or their name or where they were from. And it's kind of funny. So back in '98, the term indigenous cuisine or the terms like place-based native foods or terms like indigeneity and inspired cooking or decolonial cuisine or decolonizing indigenous foods. Those terms were very, very few and hard to come by when I first started cooking. I remember for the most part, all across the American Southwest, from Santa Fe to Texas, to New Mexico and Arizona, and even California, Southern California, indigenous foods were being practiced everywhere. But the native peoples were never being credited. So as we approach this Thanksgiving holiday, I encourage you to look at food differently, because the United States has been cooking indigenous foods since its inception. It was indigenous foodways, agricultural techniques, and traditional ecological knowledge of native peoples that allowed the United States to become a world power. It really, really changes how you look at foodways. And I hope that I can offer that fact to you. So little did I know that about 70% of foods in the grocery store are native foods. So along this journey, it's been this kind of a plight to understand myself and my own identity, but also those around me as it relates to native foods. So in this journey of cooking and in this journey of cooking and reclamation and trying to articulate an experience through native foods, I've seen these terms become more familiar and be used more commonplace. When I first started cooking, like I mentioned, all across the American Southwest, terms like Southwestern inspired French cuisine were being used, Tex-Mex cuisine, terms like American regional cuisine with Southwestern influences, French cuisine with Southwestern accents, contemporary American cuisine of the American Southwest. These were all those really glossy, whitewashed terms that were being used to articulate the use of native foods, from chilies to chocolate to large game to small game. And this, I'm just talking about the Southwestern United States. The same thing was true in the Pacific Northwest, in the Midwest, in the Southeast, all over the United States. Very, very, very few times did you hear Native American cuisine, or to be very specific, like the version that I do, White Mountain Apache cuisine of the Western Apache group. So we've gone a long way. And so what I'm going to prepare today is just kind of a introduction or a doorway into native foods. I say it's like the threshold dish. But before that, I want to give you some examples of how the world has been using native foods all along. The dish that we're going to do today, you're probably familiar with it. It's called the Three Sisters, and it involves three very important cultivars: corn, beans, and squash. And these important cultivars existed only in the Americas. They were domesticated by native peoples. So I'm going to use some corn. So as we know, every strain of corn began as teosinte, the grass seed, and through human relationship and the bioengineering and agricultural sciences of native peoples, we get this vast universe of corn as it exists today. And I'm just going to use some fresh corn here for the dish, and then I'm going to use some zucchini. Every single type of squash, from butternut to kobacha to yellow squash to delicata squash, all the varieties of squashes are indigenous to the Americas. The next cultivar I'm going to use is I'm going to use some Anasazi beans. Here's what they look like when they're dried. And I've just cooked them, just simmered them for about an hour and just in water, no stock or none of those classical techniques, just in water until they're tender. And every bean is indigenous to the Americas. There were soybeans and maybe mung beans and other types in Eurasia, but a majority, if not almost all beans came from indigenous peoples of the Americas. So these three important cultivars, known as the Three Sisters, I'm going to prepare a dish with it. And so these are very important ingredients in native foods. And keep in mind that this is not a traditional Apache dish. Growing up on the White Mountain Apache tribe, I never heard the term Three Sisters. I never heard the combination or someone saying we're going to do a Three Sisters dish, and I never even maybe saw it combined like that. But I recognize each one of these cultivars as an important food in our lives in Apache land and in Navajo land. We have squash soups, we have bean soups, we have bean and squash soups, we have bean and corn soups. So they were very, very familiar. And by following the foods, I recognize that this was like the gateway into the real Native American cuisine. So I'm going to prepare a dish with that, with these important cultivars. I'll demonstrate. But I also want to give you more examples of indigenous foods that are all around us. Vanilla, this is vanilla extract. The vanilla bean is an indigenous food of the Americas. It did not exist anywhere in Europe prior to 1500. So here's a really important extract. This one is smoked paprika. Sometimes you see it labeled Spanish paprika, but that is so far from the truth because the paprika comes from the bell pepper or one of the sweet peppers. It's dried and pulverized, and then it's dried, smoked, and then pulverized into this smoky, fragrant paprika that you get. And it's in the chili family. And every single chili is indigenous to the Americas. There was the only forms of heat in Eurasia were like peppercorns, Szechuan peppercorns, cloves, allspice. But Eurasia was missing the heat from the capsaicin of the chilies. And prior to even arriving in Europe after 1500, there were hundreds of varieties of chilies being used as far back as 6000 BC. So more evidence of how native foods have been around us all along. This is agave syrup, organic or agave syrup here. And agave is another indigenous food. All across Mesoamerica, up into our region in southern Arizona and western Apacheria, even into parts of northern Arizona, the agave plant is an ancestral food that was used as a very important natural source of sugar. So we would barbecue the stalks or barbecue the hearts in the ground, and over a long period of time, like at least 24 hours, maybe 36 to 48 hours, to get this really rich barbecued heart. So agave is all around us as well in the grocery stores. Every single, I've got some tomato product here. Every single tomato variety is indigenous to the Americas. There were no tomatoes anywhere in Europe before 1500. So when you think of tomato, one of the first cuisines that comes to mind is Italian cuisine. And prior to 1500, there was no such thing as marinara sauce or the Espanol sauce. There were none of these vibrant tomato-based dishes that are very classic in contemporary Italian cuisine. And even when it made it back to Europe, it sat around as a decorative plant for like 200 years before somebody got hungry and ate it, because people thought it was a poisonous plant. Every single variety, from the teardrops to the plums to the Romas to the heirlooms to the tiger striped, you name it, they all come from ancestral intelligence of native peoples. And so when you walk into the grocery store and you see rows and rows of tomato product or tomatoes, it's usually in the Italian section, but it's a very important indigenous food. Just like the chili was being used in all its varieties as far back as 6,000 to 8,000 BC. So very important. Even on the higher end scale of cooking or products, this is a hazelnut oil, and hazelnuts are another indigenous food, just like pecans and pine nuts and sunflower seeds and squash seeds. They can all produce their own oils. So indigenous foods like hazelnuts are all around us. Another ingredient, quinoa, kind of gained popularity in the 90s as a superfood or an exotic food or a powerhouse food, given all these kind of whitewashed terms. In all reality, quinoa is a sacred food of South America. It flourishes in the high mountains of the Andes, and is just as sacred as, say, buffalo is to the people of the Great Plains. It's just as sacred to the people of South America. So this is white quinoa, and it's packed with protein, no gluten, and there are 3 different colors of it that you can usually get in the stores. Black quinoa, red quinoa, and the white quinoa here. So very, very good source of protein and a very important indigenous food. Even another sacred food that we see all around us, very far from its ancestral roots, but chocolate. Chocolate is one of those very important cultivars of Mesoamerica that had ceremonial and medicinal applications. It was even used as currency throughout the regions. And of course, it wasn't as highly processed and packed with sugar as the varieties I have here. But when you walk into the grocery stores or you see Swiss chocolatiers or French chocolatiers doing their thing, they're using a very important indigenous food. And keep in mind that many of these indigenous foods were experienced a form of cultural appropriation that was very, very violent and very ruthless to get hold of this valuable food technology and to take it to Europe and to have it flourish across the Fertile Crescent. So very, very bright and vibrant history that can be told through native foods. Let me see. Ingredients like, again, here's another type of paprika that you probably recognize, that you've seen. Remember, a paprika is an indigenous food. So when you see Spanish paprika or if you see Spanish paprika or Portuguese paprika, they're just naming it, it's an indigenous food. And so these are just some examples of what you see in the stores. There's many, many, many more, from nuts to seeds to meat proteins to greens to different types of chilies, root vegetables like potato. Remember, the potato, all varieties, not just the russet and the Yukon or the blue. There's literally hundreds of different types of potatoes, and those are also all indigenous foods. So the narrative that we've been taught around food, nutrition, and where foods come from has been kind of skewed in the leaning towards the narrative of the colonizer. From an indigenous perspective, this explains some of the health disparities and the spiritual malady that we experience when we have no access to land, when we don't have access to ancestral intelligence, when we don't have access to indigenous foods, when we don't have access to planting and farming practices or even foraging practices. So yet the whole time they've been a part of our lives. And so my purpose of the presentation today is to kind of hopefully open up that paradigm and let you know that there's this whole world, that exciting, colorful, vibrant, intelligent world of native food history and food knowledge, when you just pay attention and listen to the ingredients. So I'm gonna begin to demonstrate, and I'll just walk you through kind of how you do this. But before I get started, I want to say that when you're going to do a Three Sisters dish, there's hundreds of types of beans. There's hundreds of types of squash. There's hundreds of types of corn, and they're seasonal. You could use winter, fall, summer, spring of each variety that I just mentioned. And I'm using what's available in the stores. Again, this is the introduction or introduction to accessibility of native foods. And when you're gonna prepare the dish, do it in equal parts corn, equal parts beans, equal parts squash. And then you can adjust the seasoning to your liking, and you can even add other ingredients, but say 1 cup of corn, 1 cup of squash, 1 cup of beans. And keep in mind that corn is nutritious on its own, but when you add the beans and the squash, they add these other enzymes that help form a complete protein. So more evidence of this really scientific, cool knowledge that you can get out of a simple dish like this. So I'll get to it, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna demonstrate. I've got my corn here, and to begin this, just a little tip, I rarely will cut my corn like this because it'll kind of spill out and go everywhere. It'll kind of make a mess on me. So I like to hold it down and get a good grip of my knife and safely hold it with my fingertips, protecting my knuckles. And I'll hold it like this so that my knuckles protect my fingertips like this, like a guide. And then I'm gonna imagine a pentagon shape, because I'm not just gonna cut it in 4 pieces like a square. I'm gonna cut on an angle. This is just my preference. I'm gonna cut on an angle in a pentagon. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So if you can see that, it's kind of like a pentagon shape. And then I go back and I'll cut off any that I might have missed. This just helps me to get off as much as possible without it spilling everywhere and running all over the board. So I'll just put my cut corn off to the side right here. And then I'll take zucchini. You could use yellow squash. You could use any other type. I use this one because it cooks really quickly. Right now for winter, you could use a butternut squash. You could use an acorn squash. You could use a pumpkin. So I just really, really gently trim off that stem. And I've already washed these ingredients. So I'm not going to fuss too much I'm not going to peel it or anything. I'm just going to let it be. So one of the first keys in cooking is you want to create safety. So you want to kind of take it, and then I cut it in half, and then I'm just going to square it off. And now it's stable. See that? It's not rolling around like this. I'm not fidgeting with it. And I got a nice sharp knife that will allow me to do just exactly what I need to do. So when you have a sharp knife, you have a safe knife because it does exactly what you need it to do. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to cut it in like a medium dice. And I just cut it in a few pieces like that. And then once I take that split part, just carefully put my knife through it like that, and kind of roughly get them all the same size, like little logs, and you can stack them up together like that. And then just repeat, square it off, get it stable, use your knuckles as a guide, put your tip down first, and then you can just cut them in half again, and making like these like really thick matchsticks, or the professional term would be batons. So and you can see I'm not getting too fussy about making them extremely perfect. I just want them to be roughly the same size. So as that's going, I'm going to heat up my saute pan here, and I'm just going to carefully dice these. The zucchini cooks really quick, and you'll see how easily this comes together. The prep work that I did is, again, like I said, I had my Anasazi beans, and I did a quick soak. Basically, I took a cup of Anasazi beans, rinsed them off really well, put them in a small pot, brought it to a boil, turned it off, let it sit for 20 minutes, and then brought it back up to a simmer for an hour or 45 minutes, and then they were done. I didn't want to cook my Anasazi beans to where they were all mushy and falling apart. I want to have those Anasazi beans have a little texture to them. So but I also want them to be fully cooked. So that's what I have here. And if you've never used Anasazi beans, there's a really cool story of resiliency and the strength of seeds. Anasazi beans were discovered in an archaeological find. They were discovered in a pot, in a dig. So they planted the seeds, and thousands of years later, the seeds grew. And so over time now, these Anasazi beans are back with us, and that's where they get their name. So when you get to cook and use heirloom ingredients or something that has a cool story like Anasazi beans, it really kind of impacts your food and how you can give some depth and knowledge to the dishes you create. So as my pan is heating up, I'm going to put this off to the side. I'm going to use my tomato for a little bit of acidity, because remember, a tomato is not a vegetable, it's a fruit. So I'm going to use this tomato just for a touch of acidity, and you'll see how and when I do it. So I'm just going to cut it across like that, and I'm just going to make a kind of roughly a medium dice also. So I'm just doing my knife work as my pan is heating up here, just like that. And then I've got my olive oil here. It's going to add it to my pan. And the tip on cooking, there is a huge difference between frying and sautéing. Frying is when there's a lot of oil in the pan and it's really kind of bubbling in the oil and you can visually see the oil. And sautéing is high heat, just a little bit of oil. So just a little cooking tip to not get confused, because right here, I'm going to sauté this dish. So cooking, really good cooking, is about a lot of common sense. And I always like to teach that cooking is relationship building with all 5 of your senses and yourself. Your sense of taste, touch, hear, even timing. It's a really neat experience because you're cooking from emotion. You're cooking from memories. You're creating something out of nothing. So if this is based on common sense, I'm going to do the raw vegetables first. So I'm going to do my corn, because again, this was raw, and I want it to caramelize a little bit. And take out my corn pieces. I use my knife, kind of like that, and carefully get it in there. And I want to let it kind of pan roast so it gets kind of caramelized. You could take the corn and grill it first and get those nice black char marks on it, and then cut it off the cob. That would add like a smoky dimension to your 3 sisters. But I just did it raw for the purpose of the demo, to show you how quick it can come together. It won't take long. So I got 1 sister in there. Remember, this is nutritious on its own, right? But when we add the beans and the squash, it adds a couple amino acids and enzymes that form a complete protein. And also, not only do they complement each other in the saute pan or on the plate, there's also a really age-old growing technique called companion planting that's used to produce the 3 sisters. So I'm going to add my squash now. I just sauteed that corn for just less than a minute at high temperature. So companion planting is, to me, physical evidence of the ancestral intelligence of our people, scientifically and nutritionally. So you could say that, to give a kind of a visual of companion planting, say this cutting board is a mound of dirt, and corn would be planted in the middle where the corn grows up, and then beans are planted at the base of the corn. And the beans have a natural beanstalk to grow up and hang their pods. And then the squash would be planted around the sides so that the big, huge squash leaves, would shade the soil. The little thorns on the vines deter pests. And it's also retaining the moisture in the soil. The beans are releasing nitrogen into the soil that the corn needs. So at every single cycle, at every single point of the cultivar's life cycle, they're helping each other out. So that's why I really like to teach this dish as an entryway, because you could teach it to kindergarten students in a community garden or a gardening project. You could teach it to middle school, high school kids, even doctorate level nutrition students in college, because of all the science and agriculture and nutritional components built into it. So to me, this is why this is such a valuable example of native foods. So as you can see, I'm letting my mixture here get nice and caramelized. I want that nice roasted color there. If you can see that, nice caramelization, nice hot pan. I'm just kind of keeping mindful that I don't want it to really get too dark. And here's another way to look at food. Cooking is a science. So right now I've got radiant energy coming from the flame, right? It's going up and would heat the room. I put a pan on it. It becomes energy transfer, right? It goes into the pan. It's going into the food. It turns caramelized, you know, produces the Maillard effect or the Maillard reaction. And then if we let it go and go and go, it would be carbonized. It would be black, right? So another fun way to look at foods and teach it. So now I'm going to take my beans. These are already cooked, and I'm just essentially warming them up. So add this in there. Turn down my pan a little bit. And these are Anasazi beans. And I always store them in the liquid so that they stay moist. So I'm just going to take them. If that last part was kind of difficult to hear, I said I always, when I cook the Anasazi beans, I always store them in the liquid so they stay nice and moist and the skins don't like peel back off of the beans. So, so there we go. I haven't added any salt yet. I'm building the flavors with the caramelization. I'm letting it kind of remain who it is per se, right? So now finally, I'm gonna add a little salt. I'm gonna take a little bit of a kosher salt, just one even layer across the top. I'm going to use a little bit of cracked black pepper. As a cooking tip, I really highly recommend investing in a good pepper mill. Buy whole black peppercorns, toast them a little bit till they kind of get smoky in the pan. Let them cool, then load your pepper mill. And it will give you a much nicer flavor. And look for a pepper mill that has a metal grinder on the inside. If you get one that has a plastic one, it's going to get dull after a year or a couple of years. If you get one that has a metal grinder, you'll keep it like a cast iron pan for maybe a decade if you take care of it. So just a little cooking tip. So seasoned with salt and pepper. I'm going to add another very important cultivar, indigenous cultivar, chilies. I'm going to add a little bit of heat to my three sisters because it's kind of cold outside, and I want to give us a little bit of heat from the capsaicin and the chilies. So I'm just going to add that in. At this point, this is where I could, depending on what season it is, you could add, like, you could chop up some kale in the wintertime, wilted in there. You could chop up some spinach, wilted in there. You could chop up some parsley, wilted in there. You could even do like lamb's quarters and pluck the leaves and put them in there and let it wilt down. But you would want to have some greens. So what I have is a couple green onions, and I'm just going to put these in there towards the end. So I just take my green onions and I cut them into like equal parts just to make quick work of it. And I just kind of put them all together, and I'm just going to thinly cut them. And again, I'm choosing green onions because it'll get a little onion note, not too pungent, but just in the background. So there you go, a little bit of green onion, and I'm not going to add them yet. I'm just going to make sure that these are all coming together. I'm going to give it a quick taste. Yeah, it's good. Needs a little more salt, just a touch. And I've got a lemon for a little bit more acidity, and I'll show you how the timing of this goes. So I sauteed all the ingredients, reheated the beans. Everything's hot right now. So I'm going to take, finally at the end, I'm going to take my diced tomatoes, and I'm going to add them in there. And I like to add the tomatoes, again, like I mentioned, as a source of acidity, and it's also another indigenous cultivar, a very important indigenous food. So I'm just going to add those in there and stir it in. and I add them at the end because I don't want, tomatoes are about 80–90% water. If I add them too early, all those cells are just going to react to the heat. They're going to expand and break, and then they're just going to release all their water into the dish. So I want them to maintain some of their shape, and so I don't overcook them and they don't get all mushy. So now I'm going to take my green onions, and I'm almost done. I just put all my green onions in the pan right there. Give it a toss again. Give it another taste. I've got a little set of tasting spoons right here. It's delicious. It's nice and clean. It's kind of roasty from the caramelization. A little bit of the heat in there. It's nice and balanced. I can taste the tomato, and I'm just going to brighten it up with some acidity of a lemon. Just a touch. Let me get these seeds out of there. Just a touch, just to brighten it. You shouldn't really taste lemon. It should just kind of brighten the flavors and make them complex. That way I don't keep adding more and more salt. Think of it this way, salt draws out the flavors, like it pulls them out, and the lemons kind of push them forward, or it kind of brightens them up. So just like that. So just a touch. We wipe off my little cutting board here. And then I have some, since there's corn beans and squash, I have a little bit of toasted pumpkin seeds that I toasted earlier. And this is going to be one of my garnishes. So I'm going to take my Three Sisters dish here. And so now take a look at all that nice color, right? The browns, the greens, the yellows, the reds, all of that color. And so this is a really prime example of what Native American cuisine really looks like. And it's so simple, and it's been around us the entire time. So I'm just going to take it and put it in a nice little white bowl. I'm choosing a white bowl so that the colors really pop. And so just kind of, no, I'm not going to like flatten it. I'm just going to kind of make it look like it just fell out of the saute pan and it landed where it wanted to. And so then I'll take my toasted pumpkin seeds and just kind of generously put some on top for a little crunch. And so there you go. A really cool side dish that is packed with protein, very nutritious, packed with science, technology, history, all these cultural components. You could talk about the trade routes from Mesoamerica all the way up into Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, the Great Plains. However far corn, beans, and squash traveled north and south from Mesoamerica, these ingredients will always tell you the true story of Native peoples, because the historical context or the historical experience of Native peoples, like I mentioned earlier, it's written leaning towards the bias of the oppressor or the colonizer. And so, but the foods, they will not lie to you. When you study the scientific history, the agricultural history, when you study the cultural history, or even the botanical history of all of these ingredients, they will tell you a true, accurate story scientifically. And they'll allude to the intelligence of the peoples that carried them. They'll teach you about creation stories, songs, protocols connected to ceremony and time and place. So all of that just packed into a really quickly sauteed dish. And this is light years beyond or behind fry bread, right? And some of the flour-based stews. And so consider making this for Thanksgiving. Then you could tell the story. Instead of saying Thanksgiving, that's going to be Indigenous Foods Day, because that's really what it's really all based on, from the turkey to the squash to the goulashes to the succotashes to the barbecue methods to even things like the clam bake. All of that ancestral intelligence around native foodways allowed the United States to thrive and become the world power it has become. And so in the year 2020, when we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic with the coronavirus, I hope that I'm offering to you a new way to look at food, because all of this information is there. It's been there since time immemorial, and it's there to be activated. It's there for you to look, maybe look at cooking as a form of self-care, because here's what I like to say in almost all of my classes that I love to do, is that cooking is art, science, history, nutrition, culture, linguistics. It's a profession, it's education, it's culture, it's identity. And when it all comes colliding together like that, when you turn on the stove or you pick up your knife and you start to pass on traditions through food and you begin to cook, all of those elements that food is connected to, you're at the nucleus. So maybe in all reality, you could say you're at the center of the universe when you're cooking, you know? So a really colorful way to look at indigenous foodways. And I hope that maybe you can look at food as a way to make different choices, because we have to make different food choices to boost our immunity, to protect ourselves and our family. Eating a lot of vibrant colored foods just like this, red berries, even tomatoes for all the antioxidants. Having a lot of protein helps us to form new neural pathways, to create new memories. Drinking more water and eating real food. I don't know about you all, but even though I'm a chef, I've been cooking more at home as opposed to dining out or being in the kitchen all the time. So the pandemic has brought these kind of applied pressure to our lives, and now we're forced to be creative to find new and creative ways to take care of ourselves and protect our families. Maybe even tell stories through your foods. Cook a dish on this Indigenous Foods Day holiday that tells a story about your family. It's a good way to get people acquainted with who you are or who your family members might have been by creating a dish and telling a story. And remember that cooking skills and knife skills, they're like riding a bike. Once you learn how to properly hold a knife and use the knife safely, it's like riding a bike. And that information goes in the bank and it can be passed on to others. So really valuable kind of way and different way to look at foodways. So does anyone have any questions from the panel? I'd like to open up to a little Q&A.
So if you guys have any questions, just go ahead and use the hand raise button and I'll unmute you.
I see one.
Hold on.
I can unmute myself there.
Okay,
Excellent. So this is just amazing. Thank you so much for bringing this program live. And I think it's so important right now for people to learn more about Indigenous food and everything. I agree with what you're saying. I'm curious about if you have recommendations. We have a seed library at our library where we can get heirloom seeds that are not genetically modified, or is there a program that exists to collect those now, or?
You're probably familiar with, if you've already got a seed bank, you're probably familiar with Native Seed Search here in Arizona.
I don't, I'm not.
Oh, okay, Native Seed Search out of Tucson, Arizona. They've got a vast seed collection of heirloom seeds, and they work really closely with a lot of native tribes to be very culturally appropriate and sensitive to our reclamation needs. So look into them, and that they sell and promote their products too.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's Ramona Farms. They produce and sell native foods. And then there's also like a Tono Optimum Community Action down in Cells. And there's a number of other native food producers now, more so than ever before. So that's one of the best ways you can support native food movements, is supporting the native producers.
Absolutely. And cookbooks?
By the way, Chef Craig, this is our library director, Tammy.
All right.
Hi, I'm a huge fan of yours. So I'm just like, there's nothing more important than food for teaching people about what you're saying, history, science, health, storytelling. So I think it's just amazing. I'm a huge fan of yours. Do you have cookbooks out there that you're going to release anytime soon, or?
Not yet. I've contributed to a lot of different pieces. I contributed to a book called Letters to a Young Farmer,
Okay.
like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I contributed to another book, Indigenous Food Sovereignty of the United States. That was by Devon Mehesua and Elizabeth Hoover, I believe. Those are two recent books that I contributed to. So you can look them up, but numerous periodicals and other things. So we'll get a book out soon, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other
Anyone else
questions?
have a question? Just use the raise hand feature, and I'll be happy to unmute you. Anybody? We did have a comment on Facebook that says that Jessica says, I really like the way you put cooking to cook is to be the center of the universe and to tell a story while you're cooking. So she really liked that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd like to encourage the viewers and the participants to, take a little time to do your own investigation into native foods. Like I said, you can Google like indigenous cultivars. You can Google like indigenous food sovereignty, and that'll take you through the wormhole of all this information that's relevant and contemporary. And as you go, remember that each ingredient tells its own story. It has its own voice. Each ingredient represents each region differently. So the way we interact with corn in the Southwest might be different from California or the Great Plains. So keep in mind that Native American cuisine or indigenous foodways is extremely micro-regional, and you can't just bulk us all into one kind of genre of native cooking, because we're all coming from different tribal landscapes, all different tribal groups and different ancestral landscapes. So very much like the professional term or French word terroir, that means representation of the soil or the taste of the soil, the climate, all of that. Native foods is very, very much the same thing. So keep that in mind as you do your own study, and use the term Indigenous Foods Day this Thursday instead of the old school one that tells a different story.
We had another question here.
Yes.
What other dish would you recommend to make with the family?
I would say just cut, buy, like, depending on how many family members you have, just buy one big butternut squash, wash it, cut it in half, maybe quarter it through the top of the stem, and clean out the seeds, and just brush it with a little bit of oil, salt and pepper, bake it in the oven, cut sides up, and let it get nice and roasty. When it's about 25 minutes in, when it's nice and soft, glaze it with a little bit of honey and chili flakes, and let it roast again for another 15 minutes. It'll get nice and it'll be like a sweet, hot butternut squash. And if you have a little bit of lemon juice, and you're good. It's a nice kind of sweet winter squash treat. It's one of my favorites.
All right, another question. Somebody says, when the pandemic's over and we can kind of get back to doing things normally, would you offer cooking classes, or do you offer cooking classes?
Yeah, I do. Maybe I could give you my info, Marcos, and you could, just pass it on. But yeah, I do, and I do offer cooking seminars and classes and a number of other things. I've got an Instagram that's just Nephi_Craig. Every Wednesdays I do a live cooking demo, and just kind of try to put some information out there. But in terms of specific training, maybe like this, yeah, I do all kinds of stuff. So
Great.
just reach out at some point.
All right, and somebody else says, that sounds delicious, referring to the squash. So thank you.
Yeah.
We
really
also
is.
had a question, not related to you, Bill, asking if this will be available. We will have it on Facebook for people to watch, and then I'm recording it so that we can put it on YouTube. So you guys will be able to watch the replay on YouTube as well.
All right, excellent. And I can send a recipe, but also just keep in mind, a recipe is only a guide. The real value in cooking comes from learning it yourself and building, like I said, that relationship building with your knife, your tools, yourself, and equal parts corn, beans, and squash. You know, could be 1 cup beans, 1 cup corn, 1 cup squash, or 100 pounds of corn, 100 pounds of beans, or 100 pounds of squash. It's all up to you. And just play with it seasonally in the you know, just play with it. And it's really effective dish.
I'm gonna quickly unmute we have a couple people on my phone. So I'm gonna see if they have any questions.
Okay.
Let's see. It looks like we're only down to 1 person on phone right now. And I can't unmute them either. Okay, well, anyone else on Facebook, if you have any questions, is your last chance to ask them. Oh, I do have one question here. Let's see. I'm not sure why it won't let me, let me check the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Gallup, New Mexico. I used to live in Window Rock and went to Window Rock High School and came to Gallup almost every other weekend and doing a lot of stuff. My family, I have family out in Wingate and family in Crown Point. My late father, Vincent Craig, was from Crown Point, New Mexico. And so we were through that whole
really?
area all the time. Yeah.
I'm familiar with that name.
Yeah, the singer and songwriter.
Huh? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you should come back to Gallup and set a restaurant up here.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple things. One person is asking, do you have a Facebook page?
Yes, yeah, I do. I'm not too active on Facebook, more so on Instagram. But yeah, I am on Facebook.
Okay.
It's just my name, Nephi Craig.
And Nephi Craig, okay. And then a lot of people are asking about your restaurant.
The Cafe Gojo is closed because of the pandemic. And once it's safe to begin operations again and complete the project, we'll finish it up. But as you saw in the film Gather, we had done our soft opening activities and we're real excited. But the cafe was a response to historical trauma in that, and I think this relates to all of our communities as Native peoples, nutritious Native foods or fresh ingredients or just basically this kind of real simple knowledge is out of sight, out of mind. It's been that way for generations. So when we can put Native foods in sight, in mind, the community members are the ones with the expert knowledge. For example, I'm not a fluent Navajo or Apache language speaker, but there are people in our communities that know how to say all of these ingredients in their native tongue. So when we put Native foods in sight, in mind, something like that, we can revitalize the language and write down how we can prepare dishes, even songs to ceremony, to even wild foods that maybe we have forgotten about. And so that's what I mean when I say it's a response to historical trauma. And it's a real humble one because this type of revolution begins at home. It begins with what we choose to eat and cook and how we choose to be advocates. Because remember, we're just facilitators. We're just the conduits for these cultivars to impact our lives. And when we trust them and let them do their thing, it's amazing. So,
yeah. One more comment. Oh,
yes.
a couple comments. First of all, one of our followers on Facebook says that they have your father's tape still.
Yeah, all right.
And
great.
then someone says, thank you for showing us the lesson today. And then we have another one, Anna Rondon, who says, it's an honor to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anna Rondon's a very important activist here in Gallup. So it is through her that I discovered you, actually. So I'm so glad Anna's here with us today.
All right. Anybody else? Final questions? Give it just a moment. There's a little delay on Facebook, so.
Sure.
But thank you so much for being willing to do this for us. And this has been a great presentation. I want to go home and make that right now. It
Me
looks so
too.
good.
Yeah, please.
I think that's it. So
Big round of
Okay.
applause. Thank you so
yeah,
much.
big applause. Everybody, there's a lot of thumbs up on Facebook. So again, thank you very much, Chef Craig. We appreciate you. And yeah, give me any of that information about the classes, and we'll definitely pass that on to anyone who wants to know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor for me to share with you. I hope I've produced a minor or major paradigm shift around native foodways and Indigenous Foods Days on Thursday. Encourage you to cook, have fun, involve your kids, and drink a lot of water. Wash your hands and mask up. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Facebook and for watching in the Zoom. And please continue to check out all of our other videos that we have. We have a lot of little short videos on our Facebook and our YouTube. So if you haven't checked out our YouTube page yet, please do so. Subscribe, watch all of our technology videos, our Creative Corner videos, our early learning videos. They're just crafty kids. We have it all. So check it all out. Please feel free to leave some more comments, thumbs up down below. And again, thank you, everyone, and have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.